Roberto woke up to the sound of the alarm clock. With automatic movements, he got out of bed and headed for the bathroom. Years of service as an investigator had accustomed him to a rigid routine. Every day was marked by rapid and precise gestures, without ever allowing himself the luxury of lingering. After washing his face and teeth, he dressed and left the house. Before continuing, subscribe to our channel and activate the bell. He had never been a breakfast lover. At most, he allowed himself a quick coffee at the bar downstairs. That morning, the cold air enveloped him as soon as he went out, and he walked toward the bar. The streets of the city were silent, immersed in a thick fog that seemed to absorb every sound. For years, Roberto had been tired of life in the city. He had worked in a dozen different places, and none of them had left a particular mark on him. The city he was in now was just another stop, devoid of charm and meaning. Everything seemed the same to him: gray skyscrapers, busy streets, and impersonal shops. Arriving at the bar, he ordered the usual coffee. Sitting in a corner, he absent-mindedly listened to the background music. A local band played tunes that reminded him of his youth. There were times when he let himself be carried away by nostalgia, thinking about how different his life had been in the past. After finishing his coffee, he headed towards the supermarket on the corner. He wasn't very hungry, but the warmth of the interior lights enticed him to go in. He walked among the shelves absent-mindedly, without a clear idea of what he wanted to buy. Suddenly, his eyes fell on a young man who was fiddling near the snacks. The boy, who looked to be about 20 years old, immediately attracted his attention with the furtive way he moved. Roberto had developed a sixth sense for recognizing suspicious situations. The young man, noticing Roberto's gaze, immediately looked away and tried to walk away without attracting attention. Roberto followed him at a distance. When the boy quickened his pace toward the exit, Roberto decided to act. He caught up with him near the door, grabbing his arm. "Stop!" he ordered in a firm voice. The young man tried to excuse himself, stammering that he hadn't taken anything. But Roberto wasn't fooled. "What do you have in your pockets?" he demanded. The boy hesitated for a moment, trembling, then began to take out what he had with him. Among the objects appeared a bar of chocolate and a small black wallet. "And this?" asked Roberto, showing the chocolate. "Didn't you say you hadn't taken anything?" The young man, his voice shaking, explained that he had stolen because he was hungry. He said he worked to support his sick mother, but he didn't have enough money for food. Roberto listened, but his heart had hardened over the years. Too many similar stories had made him wary. "How many times have you stolen before today?" he asked sternly. The boy lowered his head and admitted that he had done it before. Roberto sighed, overwhelmed by memories of his youth when everything seemed simpler. But he couldn't afford to let his guard down. He decided to take the young man to the police station for questioning. They walked in silence through the gray, deserted streets of the city. As they walked, Roberto couldn't help but think that the young man reminded him of someone, but he couldn't figure out who. When they arrived at the station, he sat the boy down in his office. "What's your name?" Roberto asked, trying to dig deeper into the boy's story. "Eduardo," the young man replied, with a look that mixed fear and shame. Roberto opened the small wallet he had found in his pockets. Inside was a folded piece of paper. When Roberto unrolled it, his heart skipped a beat. That note was an old note he himself had written many years before, belonging to Julia, the only woman he had ever loved. The memories of those distant days hit him like a wave. He couldn't believe it. How was it possible? Julia had been the love of his life, but their bond had been abruptly broken. Looking at that yellowed sheet of paper, Roberto was taken back to those moments when everything seemed possible, before life and work separated him from her. He didn't expect to find that piece of his past again. "Who does this ticket belong to?" he asked, his voice breaking with emotion. "It's my mother's," Eduardo replied, his voice faint. "Her name is Julia." Roberto felt his world collapse. That Julia? Eduardo's mother was the woman he had loved so many years ago. At that moment, everything made sense. The young man resembled him. Roberto realized that Eduardo could be his son. The revelation hit him like a bolt of lightning. Bitterness and nostalgia mixed with the awareness that life had hidden something fundamental from him for years. Without saying anything else, Roberto decided to go and see Julia. Edward explained to him that she was in the hospital, seriously ill. Roberto's heart was pounding as they walked together to the hospital. He didn't know what to expect, but he felt he had to face the past. When they entered the hospital room, Roberto saw Julia lying on the bed, pale and marked by illness, but still beautiful. Their eyes met, and Julia began to cry silently. "Roberto," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. He came closer, feeling overwhelmed. "Forgive me, I only thought of myself," he said, kneeling beside the bed. Julia looked at him softly and wiped away her tears. "You have nothing to be forgiven for," she replied. She told him how, after their separation, she had discovered she was pregnant. She had tried to contact him, but circumstances had not been in her favor. Roberto felt guilty for not being there when she needed him. "I tried to find you, but you seem to have disappeared," he said, his voice shaking. Julia smiled faintly. "It doesn't matter," she said. "You're here now. That's what matters." Roberto took her hand, feeling overwhelmed with emotion. Eduardo, who had been keeping aloof until then, approached his mother. "He's my father, right?" he asked in a tone that mixed confusion and hope. Julia nodded, confirming the truth she had kept hidden for so many years. Over the next few days, Roberto visited Julia every day in the hospital. Eduardo began working in a small shop run by a friend of Roberto's, who took him under his wing. Little by little, the three of them began to find their balance again, rebuilding the family they had never had. One day, Roberto decided to surprise Julia. He took her out of town in the car for a trip. The sun was shining, and the fresh air smelled of flowers. They stopped in a meadow, where they sat on a blanket and talked about the good times gone by, happy to be together again. Julia seemed to be getting better every day. "Thanks to you, my will to live has returned," she said with a smile. "I feel alive again." Roberto took her hand, promising that he would never let go of her again. "We are together, and that's all that matters," he replied, holding her tightly to him. From that moment on, their life took an unexpectedly happy turn. Roberto, Julia, and Eduardo became inseparable, and the disease seemed to slowly recede. Together, they built a new life, full of love, trust, and hope. The past, with all its difficulties, now seemed a distant memory. Did you like this story? Leave a comment below. Thanks for watching the video till the end, and see you next story.